Representing the publishers are Ms. Kartika VK, Ms. Urvashi Butalia, and Mr. Ravi Singh. We have Mr. Kiran Nagarkar representing the authors. Ms. Kartika VK is a publisher and chief editor of HarperCollins Publishers, India. Ms. Urvashi Butalia is co-founder of India's first feminist published house, Kali for Women, and currently director of Zuban. Mr. Ravi Singh, one of the best editors in the world of publishing. After holding senior jobs with Penguin India and Aleph, he has now set up his own imprint called Speaking Tiger.
Mr. Kiran Nagarkar is a novelist, playwright, film and drama critic, and screenwriter both in Marathi and English. He's one of the most significant writers of post-colonial India. Our moderator for the discussion is Ms. Anjum Hassan, writer, poetess, and critic. Currently, she is the book's editor for The Caravan. We invite you all for the discussion.
Welcome to panel discussion on publishing in the time of diktat. And we have, as you can see, three very prominent publishers, Urvashi Butalia, Kartika from HarperCollins, Urvashi from Zuban, and Ravi Singh, who's just left Aleph to start a publishing house on his own. And I'm especially happy to have Kiran Nagarkar here as well, who is a very well-known writer, of course, but has also grappled with the issue of censorship in his columns, as well as having to face censorship personally because of a play he wrote back in the 70s called Bedtime Story. So I hope to hear a little bit about that particular experience. I don't know how well known that is, and I don't know if you've written about that particular experience. By way of introduction, I wanted to say that we live generally in an atmosphere of intolerance, out of which, against that broad landscape, out of which increasing intolerance for publishing, for particular titles that are published that are deemed to give offense, is really just one instance. And intolerance increasingly doesn't seem to be the preserve of any one group or any one religious community or any one person. It is across the spectrum. People feeling offended on behalf of Hinduism, on behalf of Islam, on behalf of Sikhism, on behalf of Jainism. It's across the spectrum. It's to do with all of the creative arts, all kinds of self-expression, whether it's cinema, writing, even sports, as we saw in the case of Sania Misra. So we're living generally in an atmosphere of increasing narrowing of imagination and seeing things in black and white and being very, very quick to channel misconception, to channel bewilderment, to channel outrage into this idea of offense. So I would like also to talk a little bit about what do we mean, what does it mean to take offense? And can we turn this around into anything productive? Because right now all we're dealing with is a situation of crisis where offense takes the form of muffling, of silencing. So because we have three publishers who are really at the front lines, increasingly being a publisher now in this milieu is to be really in a situation of crisis and to be, I think, vetting every book in your mind and asking yourself, is this going to be received well or is it going to get me into trouble? So I wanted to start by asking Urvashi and Kartika and Ravi, in the recent past or generally in your experience, have you had to let go of a title that you really liked because you thought it might create problems, that it will not be well received, it won't go down well? And what kind of decision is that? What kind of moral dilemma are you grappling with there?
No, I haven't, fortunately, yet been in that situation. But it's likely that it will happen at some point. What one will do then, I don't know. But what I'm very clear about is that whatever needs to be done should be done before the book is accepted and published, not after. Once you've done that, you've taken a decision, or your colleague has taken a decision, you stand by the book and the author no matter what. But yeah, I mean, you know, it may sound like bravado, but I don't think if there's a book that one wants to publish, one will find a way of doing it.
Kartika, would you like to share?
I agree with Ravi that I've never been in a position where I found something that I really wanted to publish and did not manage to publish. On the contrary, in the last few months particularly, we've published several books that seemingly could have been problematic. We published a book called Modi and Godra. We published a book on the Shiv Sena called Samrat, which was deeply critical of Bal Thackeray. We've done a book called Demystifying Modi just when the elections were around the corner, which was not a positive book. Nothing happened. I mean, obviously you give it to the lawyer, you get it vetted, and there are laws by which you have to live. I mean, you can't just say, I want to do whatever I want to do. You will get it read. You will get it read for defamation, libel, obscenity, all the things that you need to do, and which your author has signed with you on in terms of a contract to say all of these things have been taken care of as well, and then you back it up. And then really, if you're on solid legal ground, the sentiments angle really applies mostly, I think, to religion and religious content. And perhaps I've just not really been there yet with a book like that. I mean, I haven't published A Midnight's Children or anything in that category, which is why I've never actually faced up to it. So I'm also one of those who's not yet suffered it.
Okay. I'm a little curious about how the legal process works, because you're on the point of publishing a book. It could be critical about a figure in power, and of course it will offend. Of course it will say things that that person or his cohorts don't want to hear. So how do you protect yourself or get some kind of legal insurance in advance? Because in theory, that person could sue for defamation.
Well, no, even defamation has rules against which you sort of have criteria against which you judge that. And any lawyer who's looking at IPR and copyright violation, etc., would also be able to tell you what crosses the line. So if we publish a book where we're saying a big company is known to be corrupt in certain ways, then sometimes you might not name that company because you have no evidence to say it is indeed taking money in these ways. But you can give enough indicators there for the author and for you and any reader to be able to tell who we're talking about, and leave it at that, because legally you cannot accuse somebody of doing something like that without evidence. But if you have documentary proof and you know this is on, then there is no harm in going out there and saying it. And the lawyer recently told me something interesting when I was commissioning a book about a prominent political person. We've just signed it on, and I said, this is probably going to cause offense to some people, including the person involved. And she said, you know, with a political person, you'll probably get away because they don't want too much publicity either about this stuff. Now, you go and you go and write about somebody who's got very big business interests or stakes that are tied to this, they might object. But if you're talking about a politician who then moves on from one election to the other and is used to muckraking, you'll probably get away with it. So it also depends on the context and not entirely on the law. But I think a lawyer should be able to tell us this much before publishing.
It's interesting you mentioned the case of a book on a corporate body. And if you're bringing allegations against them, it has to be backed up with evidence. But we're also talking about books that are driven so much by analysis and interpretation, and these things can be subjective. I mean, that is the beauty of writing, that you bring an individual point of view, even to historical subjects, certainly to mythology. And as the recent case of the Wendy Doniger books showed, it's really about what kind of angle and what kind of enthusiasm and what kind of emphasis you bring to a subject that can be so controversial. Urvashi, would you like to respond to that? What happens when we come into a realm where it's so much about interpretation and not about hard facts?
Before I do that, can I just answer your first question? Because unlike Kartika and Ravi, I have actually been in a situation like that. And also, unlike Kartika and Ravi, although I don't know what Ravi's situation is now that he set up an independent publishing house, you know, it's very contextual, it's very different. Smaller publishers like us, cannot afford to have a lawyer on retainership. So we cannot afford to be showing every book to a lawyer. We have to rely a lot on our own judgment. In any case, the kind of publishing we do, all the material is by definition offensive to one class of people, which is largely men, because we publish feminist literature, but they don't usually take it seriously, because your thing about subjective and interpretation, feminist critique is not really given the importance that it deserves in terms of weight and interpretation and so on. So, in a sense, we get away with that. But I have been in a situation like that, and it was a very complicated situation because there was a book that we were going to publish, and it was not yet contracted, but the discussions had taken place with the editor. And the editor, it was an anthology of writings, the editor jumped the gun a bit and offered one of the pieces that she wished to include to journal to carry as an extract. And that piece was one of the stories from the book. And it got published, and it was mentioned that this book is going to come out. Nothing happened. And 2 months later, someone picked it up, spotted it, filed a report in a Bombay police station. And that report was sent to the Delhi police station of our Thana, and the Thanewala constable pitched up at our doorstep saying, I have got this, and he showed us the whole thing. And it was very scary. And the copy of the same document was sent to the author and to the editor, to us, and my editors and I were personally named in it. Now, what was my reaction? My reaction, I have to say, was, first of all, very colored by the fact that the author of that piece herself was quite frightened by it, and quite rightly so, because the threats implicit in that report that we got was scary. And she lived between England and India, and you can imagine what it would do to your visa coming back and forth when you have family here and everything. So she wasn't sure she wanted to pursue the matter, and she wasn't sure, because the book had not been published, because it hadn't been contracted. You might ask, what ethical domain are you in at that point? Do you listen to the author? Do you listen to the editor? Do you worry about this? So my thing as a publisher was, okay, what do I do? And the other very genuine fear in my head was, I run a publishing house which employs 8 people. It's very small. 3 of those 8 people are a cook and 2 peons. My first concern was, what if there's violence, or what if we get shut down because of this, or what if all our resources go in fighting a case? What do I do about these people's lives? I'm responsible for their lives. So I have to say that at the top of my head was not freedom of expression, nothing like that. At the top of my head was concern for my colleagues. I run an all-woman office. What if we got vandalized, which is a very real scenario? How would I protect these women? As it happened, so I'm just trying to tell you the questions in my head. As it happened, nothing happened, because the reply that we gave, rather like the reply that Aleph and Rupa gave in the Dinanath Batra case, was a reply that said, we have not yet contracted this book, and when it gets published, we'll see. And so the police decided not to admit the FIR, not to file a charge sheet, sab kuch, and it was finished. That was the end of that. What if it had gone forward? I do not know how I would have behaved. I do not know whether I would have fought for an author who was herself fearful, fought for a right which, without the material base for that right, I don't know how you fight for it, or worried about my colleagues and taken a stance that saved my colleagues' lives and their salaries and did not put my publishing house in danger. I don't know. So I think it's very, very difficult to take those kinds of decisions. And I think in the Doniger case, the thing that surprises me, as a publisher, I understand, I'm not saying I endorse it, but I understand the Penguin decision, which to me, when I look behind it, is a corporate decision rather than a decision related to freedom of expression. The company was merging with another company. When you merge or when you're bought over, you don't carry your liabilities with you, you have to drop them. They dropped them. I think that what happened with that same book in another publishing house, we should ask, how is it that Dinanath Malhotra is a publisher who I greatly respect. Sorry, my apologies. Don't tell him, please. But Dinanath Batra, how is it he allowed, he pushed one publishing house to take one step, allowed the other publishing house to get away with the same content. we don't actually ask that question ever. So I think there's so many complicated things in this that to me the issue, much though I would like to say that I would like to fight for the rights of freedom of expression and fights for the rights of the authors, I really don't know when push comes to shove how I'll react.
I think it's very interesting, your description of the first case, where you're talking about police at your door, which is frightening in any situation, and the possibility of an FIR being lodged. And I think there are two things that get intertwined, and I think that's characteristic somehow of the Indian situation, where there is the whole legal angle and the legal path, and that will take its course. That is harassment of its own kind, of course. There are resources involved, there's mind space involved. But there's also the other thing, which is extra legal, which is fear of a mob turning up at your door, which actually has nothing to do with the legal angle at all. And somehow, in our case, why has it happened? Kiran, maybe you could respond to this if you have thoughts on this. Why has it happened that apart from the legal side and the threat of legal action, which is justifiable or not justifiable, but is still within the terms of the law, there's this other side that we live in an atmosphere of fear, where we could be attacked physically because we're publishing or because we're writing books that have upset people?
You know, just right off the bat, what I would like to say very clearly is that one of the preconditions of censorship, and as much for extra-legal as legal censorship, most of the time is that the book is unread. I mean, take the case of Satanic Verses. Who had read Satanic Verses, for God's sake? Or I wrote the play Bedtime Story, and good Lord, it was not published, it was not circulated. They would not even allow the first rehearsal to take place. So it has got nothing to do with the contents of the book. What I think really matters is that some political party decides that, okay, there's some mileage here, and that is why they take up the cause. And don't forget that one of the most important points is that censorship now has become a competitive matter. If you recall Da Vinci Code, the censor board had given, the biggest guy there had given permission, and then 8 states came around and they said, no, we are not going to allow this movie to be shown. Or you take the Kazantzakis book, The Last Temptation of Christ. It was the same thing. It was, it's got nothing to do with the book or its contents or whether you're genuinely upset or hurt. You just think, okay, there's a cachet here that I must exploit. So I don't know whether I answered your question really, yeah.
I'd like to hear a little bit about Bedtime Story, because that appeared in an earlier era of suppression, which was the emergency, which was a particularly dire time when we're talking about suppression of freedom of expression. Would you like to tell us a little bit about what the play was about, why you think it was suppressed?
It's a play about responsibility. I had just discovered that I was responsible for the fact that I did not stand up and raise my voice most of the time, and for my colossal ignorance about, this is a long time ago, okay, so I'm talking about Vietnam, and I'm talking about Cuba, and that Ho Chi Minh was a democratically elected leader. And we just followed what America was telling us, and it did not matter that someone was democratically elected, just as later on, that the Chilean president, yeah. I mean, most of the time, I realized I am responsible because all of us just sit there and say, what can I do? So I wrote this play to say that anything that happens anywhere in the world, you and I are responsible. And it is such a, I'm sorry to say this, but it is a very, very abrasive play. And by the end, what I use episodes from the Mahabharata. And as you know, so often in the Mahabharata, some dreadfully terrible things are going on. I mean, think of leave the Draupadi episode altogether, but think about what happened to Ekalavya. Yeah. And this is taught to us in schools, at least when I was in school, it was taught as, this is the way to go. This is the relationship between a Shishya and his Guru. That's how it should be. So, you know, I took that episode, that was the first episode, and I turned it around. And what I did was that when Dronacharya returns and finds that his non-pupil with an absentee guru has turned out to be a fantastic archer, and there is Arjun constantly saying, but you promised me I was going to be the top guy. At which point he says, you know, ultimately he tells Ekalavya, you know, you've done so many things on your own, and I'm really a very proud teacher of yours, but ultimately you must remember that you have to honor the Guru. And Ekalavya says, yeah, of course I have to honor the Guru. Just ask. And you know, Dronacharya quibbles and quibbles, and then he says, well, if you're going to give it to me, then of course I want your right thumb. At which point Ekalavya says, of course I'll give it to you. And he bends down, he picks a bit of earth, he spits in it, makes it into a right thumb, and he hands it to Dronacharya, and he says, Dasa Guru Tashi Guru Dakshina. So I tried to turn it around. That was all, really, yeah.
Okay, to come back to publishing, Ravi, you've recently left Aleph Book Company and started your own imprint. Apparently, part of the reason why you left was because of the whole fracas over Wendy Doniger. Is that something you want to talk about? And I have a second question which is related to this landscape of how publishers are negotiating these challenges, which is that, do you know of a case where a publisher has actually fought in court for a book to be reinstated and won? And is there an instance like that we can hold up and say, look, publishers, if you really have to go all the way, here is an example, a successful example?
Speculation, yeah, there is. I didn't want to talk about it too much earlier. I still don't want to talk too much about it. Was that the reason why I left Aleph? Yes, it was the reason. Because I disagreed profoundly with the way things were being handled. And you know, it's not fair. No Aleph representative is here, so I don't want to. But let's just say that I just found it unacceptable, what was happening.
What was it that was happening?
Yeah, you know, then I'd have to talk about it. So let's not do that. It's for them really to clarify their position. Yeah, look, I know it is a little odd, and the reason why I don't want to talk about it, because there's still a couple of colleagues at Aleph whom I like and respect. There are authors published by Aleph whom I, like and respect, and so I don't want them to suffer on account of negative publicity. And there was also something which put the author, Wendy, I thought, at some risk. I'll let it be at that.
It feels like it's an unfolding story, so maybe...
I don't know what happened after I left. Yeah. Maybe it's still unfolding, but it seems to have unfolded in some manner. So they should speak about it.
We'll get to hear more about this as time goes on.
Well, I doubt you'll ever get to hear anything, but,
So it will remain one of those clandestine things in the history of Indian
there are people...
I think, sorry Ravi, sorry to interrupt. Just to say, I think it's not, one has to look at it in terms of both the publisher and those who feel offended by what the publisher, because on both sides the stances are not like black and white. There's a lot of grey in between. So in the Aleph, whatever happened with Aleph, and none of us, as Ravi says quite rightly, none of us outside really knows, we're all speculating. But the thing is, it's not only that, it's also, Dinanath Batra presents himself as this fellow with great ideals and commitment. Rubbish. He's as willing to be sold as the next man, and why don't we talk about that?
But Ravi,
sorry, no, please.
She asked you a question which I was very intrigued by. Oh, sorry. Do you know many cases where we have actually... Sorry.
Coming to that, actually, no, Urvashi may be able to...
Shivaji.
But Shivaji was not OUP. It wasn't OUP who went to court.
But it was then settled, and the book is back.
I don't know if OUP have put the book back in print. I don't think they have.
It is back. It is back.
It's an OUP thing? With the essay?
Are you talking about Ramanujan or Shivaji?
I'm talking about Ramanujan.
Yeah, Ramanujan is back. And
back.
Shivaji, yeah, apparently it is.
So, but in any case, that was not OUP that went to court for it.
Yeah.
I actually can't think of any example. What she can
The Shivaji was OUP too, wasn't it? And then
they
it's
fought
back.
the case in court. No,
Yeah, because it went all the way to the Supreme Court.
I don't think 300 Ramayanas
Is back.
was ever the subject of a legal
No,
It
no,
was
no.
just, there was protest because
Yeah.
it had an essay by Ramanujan called 300 Ramayans, which people had a problem with. The publisher withdrew the whole anthology, and later the anthology, because of the pressure of the academic community, was back. So that's not an example of a legal
Yeah.
case. I don't know.
Shivaji went to court, the Supreme Court ruled, it went back.
No, I
in
still
print.
don't. I'm not entirely sure. We should check this whether
I'm fairly
OUP.
sure. I don't know if it was
fought-
OUP
that's what I'm saying.
or the author or
So that's
whoever.
what I'm saying. You asked about a publisher going to court, so I'm not sure whether OUP went to court. Apart from that, I can't think. No, she asked only about the publisher, and I think in this case it does matter. It's publishers.
Publishers being in the
There was a case, I now don't remember the details of it, and it's not a contemporary case. It was in the 1920s or something like that, 1927, which was about using the same 295, that hurt sentiments law, but the publication of a magazine, which was a magazine run by a member of the Hindu community, and there was an essay, a piece in the magazine, something to do with Goraksha Samiti or some such thing, which was actually cited as something causing hurt sentiments. The case went to the courts, and the courts ruled in favor of the publisher. So as far as the precedent is concerned in Indian law, there are strong precedents that you can actually draw on, because our law works so much on precedent.
But is it really the case that, because the perception is that this will go on forever, it will cost a lot of money, does it make a difference if it's a civil case or a criminal case, the speed at which it's resolved, and are all these examples that you're mentioning, Urvashi, have they all been so tedious? And I mean, is there a way to make this more effective so that publishers then actually, when it comes to the crunch, go to court and fight the cases?
No, I think there's a way in which you need to unpack. There are different laws here. As Kartika mentioned, the issue of defamation, that comes under a different law. So that's possible to fight because it's, in a sense, provable and so on and so forth. The thing that's the complicated one is this business of hurt sentiments. Because one, in the law, the hurt sentiments are only allowed to a community, and a community is defined as a religious community. So for example, as I was saying to you earlier, as a woman, my sentiments are hurt every hour of the day in this country, which is so anti-women and the kind of things that politicians say, but I'm not a religious community, so I can't damn men to court. I would like to, just take them to court and have lots of cases just to give them grief, but you can't do that.
So that legally only a representative religious community can have hurt sentiments, is
Can
that right?
have hurt sentiments, and then they can file a case against the person and those cases can be can target institutions or persons. And then you can, I'm not entirely clear about the law, then you can file cases which are criminal and civil. Now, in criminal cases, you can, of course, be arrested and put into jail, and that's the fear. Because if it is, like suppose somebody filed a case against Harper and named Kartika personally, she could be put in jail, and the Dinanath Batra case demanded, for example, that Wendy Doniger come for court hearings to India. Why should she? Why should she fly out from America to attend a court hearing in India? But then if she doesn't come, and there are other parties who have been going, but if one party doesn't come, you can get an ex-party judgment. It's completely crazy. I mean, the law is crazy. So many of us don't even understand it. I don't understand it myself. I'm telling you what I've gleaned in this past few months from being faced with this kind of thing and learning from lawyers. But we have never thought it necessary to sit down and study the law in detail.
Actually, it's interesting because that actually, I realize, is something that we should all do, study. And so the person that I will now be working with, when I met him, and maybe that helped me decide, in a sense, to work with him, apart from many other things, was that he had paid two good young lawyers to compile a booklet. It's called Freedom to Publish, which is making available free. to everybody who wants it, especially publishers, which lists all the relevant laws that would apply to publishing, not just books, but also any other written material. And so what the law exactly is, in what way could you, what is the word for it? Could you violate that law? And what remedies, legal remedies would be available to you. So once you understand that, at least before, when you're looking at a manuscript and before you go to a lawyer, because you don't immediately send it there, you at least are aware of what you could run into. So I think it's important for publishers to know. But at the end of the day, you have to make subjective decisions, because lawyers will say, according to me, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do this, so this should be taken out. But that might just undermine the book completely, right? So then you have to take a decision.
I think it's also increasingly about authors deciding that they don't even want to take that risk. And that is actually, from my point of view, that is the longer term danger there, because you just say, well, do I really want to get into this? And forget about what the publisher will say, the lawyer will say, etc. They don't even want to be in that position. So I see a lot of cases where we get manuscripts and then people take out stuff on their own. And they say, but that's not the point of the book, is it? Do I really need to say this? Let me get rid of it. And so that's the more embedded thing that is likelier to emerge from this kind of climate. And there it won't be about the law, it'll be just a gradual silencing of the kinds of things that you fear will be troublesome.
Yeah, I think Ratika's right, that's the scariest thing. But I think also another question that comes up is, which Wendy Doniger raised, which is, in the age of the internet, what does this actually mean? Because, okay, you can put any number of curbs, but authors who want to write what they want to write can be available widely on the internet. And there's very little you can do about that, because you may not, if it's a publisher, if it's you putting an e-book, you might get attacked by somebody who's going to file a case against you. But if that e-book is pirated and is widely available, then what?
But yeah, so again, there's still two aspects to it, because the book could be available, even though there's a legal case and there's an injunction to withdraw it, it could still have a life online. But the fact remains that the author and the publisher are still in trouble. They could still be harassed, still have to go to prison or whatever. So that remains a problem despite the internet. I think internet enables circulation and extends the life of a book even if it's withdrawn from the physical copies are withdrawn. Kiran, what do you feel about what Kartika just said, that we're seeing a situation of increasing self-censorship? As a writer, how would you respond to that? Are you envisaging a situation tomorrow where you may want to say something that's highly critical of the powers that be or even of the milieu, and ask yourself, is it worth it?
Yeah, I've faced this very often, and I've known a long time ago that I'm a rat, Do I want to get into trouble with the Shiv Sena? The moment this bedtime story was, it was talked about, before I knew it, they were out, the Hindu Mahasabha and the Shiv Sena was out to get me, get Dr. Lagu and all the others. So there was not even a single rehearsal took place. So I have to say that I am of course scared, quite seriously scared, and which is one of the reasons, not that I have ever wanted to write a historical book. I think Kakkal was a mistake in that sense. But supposing I wanted to write about Shivaji, and as a matter of fact, it's quite likely that one can write a book about Shivaji in a very, very, not hagiographic fashion, but the man has qualities which are absolutely remarkable. I remember meeting several Marxists who told me that his regimen of agricultural taxation is absolutely remarkably good. He understands the role of the farmer and what he suffers. So, I would want to write, and it's a very exciting life. In Marathi you say, Agrahun Sutka, he was able to get away from Agra under the eyes of Aurangzeb. So it makes for a hell of a story. But do you think I must be off my bloody rocker to think that I would write that. And take another look at Subhash Chandra Bose. who can write about Subhash Chandra Bose in a really very, very sane fashion? So I know that I don't have courage, I am not capable of it.
Which is, of course, all nonsense, because you're just publishing bedtime story and it's going to be out there and everyone's going to be reading it. So
Great news. You didn't tell us that, Kiran. Are you publishing it?
Yeah,
oh,
we are.
That's wonderful. Okay. So let's look at the bright side of this, if there is one. Let's move a little away from the bleakness of this scenario and ask ourselves, are there things publishers can do collectively? You mentioned this book, Ravi. Are there other ways in which publishers can band together and maybe even go on the offensive? Because you're really in such a defensive position, on the back foot. Are there ways in which you can even engage with the opposition, preempt protest?
I think that's absolutely necessary. I think publishers have to work together. I think it's going to be difficult because there are publishers who might want to publish a certain kind of book or say no to a certain kind of book. Somebody else may think we'll publish it. And then then inevitably the publisher who is not publishing it is not going to be very favorably disposed towards the one who is publishing it. And in a sense, it's admitting that we didn't have the spine and you're doing it, etc. But I think it's possible. Where's the harm really in talking to Batra or talking to the Shiv Sena? Talk to them, but you should be very clear about what you're not going to do. And you should be very clear about, as I said, just being honest about it. And publishers together are going to be able to do that, I think, more effectively than individual publishers.
Because what is alarming to me is that publishers are withdrawing books or saying we need to reevaluate books in anticipation of protest.
That's nonsense. I mean, at least, as you're saying, we couldn't think of anybody any publisher who's actually gone to court and stayed with the case, number one. Number two, there is a genuine threat of violence in cases. But there are cases where there is no threat of violence, but it's used as an excuse by the publishers not to do anything. If there is somebody who's called up and made a threat, and there are some cases, may have happened, he was threatened, the publisher, whatever, go to the police, make it public, talk about it. Exactly. Call their bluff. So, yes, the threat of violence has happened, but there are ways also. I mean, that's problematic, but there again, if you're together, it might be easier.
Exactly, yeah. Kiran had a suggestion about how we can, as writers, because writers have a stake in this as well, and it's not ideal to say, okay, I've written the book and now the responsibility is on the publisher. And we were talking about, Kiran, and you'd even written something about how can writers be involved in this fight? How do we contribute to this sense of fraternity that publishers need to develop?
Community.
Community.
Fraternity.
Sorority.
Sorority is all right.
No, I have quite a few suggestions, and I'm not sure whether they're at all workable. But the first one was what Ravi, you also mentioned, that pool the resources in terms of money, just keep it there, and put something by every year. And I think authors should also do the same thing. And there's no point with an author saying, but I have only written innocent stuff. I think it'll be a good idea that authors also contribute. I'm not saying they can contribute huge amounts. People like me who don't do well at all will still have to contribute. There's no question about it. But before I come to the other points, and if you will tell me whenever you want me to shut up, okay? But what really intrigues me is that what has happened to the intelligent public around, that they seem to be totally comatose. I mean, apart from the fact that the great BJP speakers like Arun Shourie and our friend Akbar, there's not a peep out of them, I mean, and I can't believe that they are not aware of this. And during the emergency, certainly Arun Shourie and his boss were extremely vocal and magnificently so. But apart from them, what has happened to all those parents who send their children to college and want their children to do extremely well, and very often they want their children to go to science courses? What are they going to, in the courses that they're going to do or apply for abroad, what are they going to say? That there was a virgin birth in the Mahabharata with Kunti? Or, that we have now got ways of transplanting animal heads over some I mean, really, so what are parents doing? And one of the things that I was trying to deal with, because of my background in never mind which particular dubious profession, I thought, you know, what we have, apart from the fact that authors, thinkers, and everybody has to troop down to colleges and talk to the youngsters and put it to them what kind of society they want to live in, really. I mean, I would want to do that very much, but this is not a single effort thing at all. We have to do this, because if I had called my article The Last Stand, you know, I don't think we'd have much of a chance, because yesterday I read in the papers that Smriti Irani, my all-time heroine, and the RSS people are getting together to revamp the entire cause. So in that sense, I think we are about to enter the dark ages if we don't really get our act together. So one of the things was that, and then I had some suggestions, but I think I'm taking too much time. Huh?
No, that's fine. But do you want to talk about the suggestions?
Yeah, please just hang in there if you feel like it. And if you don't, then just walk out on us, really. Okay, you know, I'm going to read this, okay? Whatever other measures, including the ones that I have just outlined, we may employ, the most important and effective one will always be public opinion. Obviously, we don't have the millions of rupees to run the kind of press, radio, and other media campaigns that the government swamped us with prior to the national and Maharashtra elections. But fortunately, we too have access, at least as so far, to YouTube, Twitter, emails, and every other internet media that Mr. Obama and Mr. Modi utilize so effectively. I'm speaking about this through from absolutely magnificent ignorance. Okay, I never go to the internet, so but I believe these channels can be very effective. Let me offer a few random suggestions for a campaign directed at young people headed for the States, Europe, or Australia. Does your father, who is such a staunch follower of the PM, expect you to get into one of the finest universities in the world by telling your professors that we were flying planes in the 6th century BC? Or the second one would be, wow, do you really expect to get into Harvard Medical School by telling them what the PM told you? That you were performing transplants of elephant heads on human bodies before the beginning of time? You know, this kind of, so that you may provoke them to do things. Now this one is for the parents. Obviously you want your children to get a head start by giving them the best education. Question is, do you want them to be taught genuine science, history, geography, or do you want them to learn that Ram flew in a plane in prehistoric times and that we were doing stem cell research therapy around the same time? Or when your son is writing the crucial essay along with his application to the Harvard Medical School, do you really want him to say that we were performing transplants of elephant heads or human bodies before the beginning of time, or that Karna was the result of artificial insemination? Come, sir, your children deserve much better than that. You know, something of this kind. But I thought, unless I put it down on paper, there's nothing really. You know, it's just so much vacuum. So I was thinking of doing something like this. I'm sorry for taking so much time, sorry.
I think that one, of course, publishers working together and all of that, as Ravi said, is one. But the other side of it is, really the other answer is we just keep publishing what we have to publish and just keep going at it. If precedent is what works for law, then the more books you have out there that do what needs to be done, there will be other people who will say, oh, that worked, nobody stopped that, I can do one more, and I can do one more. And the more you have, that's really doing what you want to get done. And that in itself is a positive thing to do. And that's an offensive. It's not just publishing for publishing's sake.
Yeah. And it's also interesting that even as this opposition is growing, we're living in an era in India where publishing is growing. And many more books are being published than ever before, many more kinds of books, many more kinds of writers. So there is also variety and range of opinion being expressed. We have to take that in consideration as well. One practical question from the point of view of a writer on behalf of the writers in the audience. In a contract between publishers and writers, how much responsibility for any eventual legal hassles is with the writer and how much with the publisher, and how do you decide that issue?
I wanted to actually talk about that. You know, being a publisher, maybe I'm kind of not serving our interests. If an author really wanted to look carefully, the warranty clause and, you know, is a frightening clause. Basically what you're saying, it's all your responsibility, you know. So, I don't know. I mean, maybe Kartika, I don't know what you can do about it.
But I also think that while the author is giving you the warranty and so on, saying it's an original work, it's not plagiarized, it's not offensive, all of that stuff, finally when you get taken to court, the publisher gets taken as well, and you've got to go fight it as alongside the author. And in a lot of cases, the author is not the one who can do it. The publisher would end up doing it, and your legal costs would be split, your liabilities are split halfway. So the contract is actually saying you would share the liability. It's not saying all the legal costs are yours.
Yeah, I'm not talking about the legal costs. I'm saying that from an author's point of view, it can be frightening, you know, for them, especially when you're saying that there are authors who would not write something they want to write. That might become, so this may, in a sense, contribute to that. Maybe there should be something outside of the contract where publishers inspire confidence in authors, and, you know, maybe something of that needs to be, we need to think about. And also, maybe even refining those clauses. I know that we've lived with this clause for a long time, which says you also warrant that there's nothing obscene, etc., or any other legally, what is it? Objectionable, or any other,
pornographic,
which could be pretty much anything, you know. So we need to look at that.
But I think also the thing is, you know, in a sense, this is something in which we all have to be together, and authors too must take the responsibility of carefully reading their contracts. What happens is very often authors just, you know, when you go to rent a house, you will read the lease, every word of it, because you might be screwed on any of those deals. You'll read it to the point of, you know, how many pankhas, how many this, how many that. When authors sign contracts, they don't even look at it. You just go patak and sign it. And it's crazy because you really need to read and talk about it. And I think there is a way in which, just as you were saying, that publishers need to get together, and they do, and there have been attempts, for, you know, where meetings have been held and we've been talking about how to deal with these things collectively, which have not had a lot of success, but at least it's a beginning. But I think authors and publishers need to work together to see what are the best practices that they can actually develop between them. Because many of our contracts are old contracts, but there are new practices that have come in which make the relationship much more egalitarian, which have to come in, but there must be also some initiative and pressure from authors to do that, and then I think it will begin to change. So Ravi is absolutely right. The contract says the author indemnifies the publisher against XYZ, and you read it and you might think it's all the author's responsibility. Kartika is also right. When it comes to the crunch, it's the publisher who fights on behalf of the author. Can we have that somewhere in the contract? Maybe that'll help.
Yeah, so it's about saying, I think, that, so every time you sign a contract, or at least with a lot of authors, they will come back to you and say, okay, we're indemnifying you. How do we know that when it comes to it, you're going to leave us in the lurch and nothing's going to happen? At which point, I think it is really about outside the contract, where you're telling the person that, look at what happens in real life, that whatever you sign, finally, hopefully, you are going to have us standing by you, and we're going to be doing all the hard work. Hopefully, that's what it'll work out, and that's how you end up actually getting that persuasion, and which is how it's worked out till now. But it could be that there will be a day when a publisher says, well, you sign, now you go fight the battle, and there's nothing in that contract that says this is not possible either.
I just, there's one point I had to make also about publishers and authors working together, yes, but also authors, because there are authors who make a lot of money, authors who are, you know, who have huge stature. I think they shouldn't abandon those who don't have that stature, don't have those resources, are not bestsellers. And it may, I hope this isn't misconstrued. There are cases, there have been cases where certain authors, if they took a stand, said this is unacceptable, and they said that to the publisher, perhaps certain, you know, things that we find problematic wouldn't have happened. You know, the publishers would have said, okay, fine, now I really shouldn't do this, or what I'm doing is wrong. So pressure is important.
You mean an important writer, a writer who's making a lot of money, turning around and saying to the publisher, this is unacceptable Sorry, with relation to what? With relation to something they're publishing, or
something they're publishing, or for instance, if you take the Doniger case, I think if publishers really got together, I'm not authors. I'm not saying every author needs to agree with what she's written in the book. You may have your problems, but if you're very clear that a book that's out there, it deserves to be out there. It's not, you just stand by it. Just say, we may not have written this, we may not entirely agree with you, but you have the right to, and therefore put pressure on publishers too.
Well, in the case of
the
Penguin,
Ramanujan thing, for instance, was a huge.
That's a very good example of a community community, right? Coming together.
More of that.
Many of them were women. So many of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the Ramanujan thing.
Absolutely. But in the case of the Penguin thing, it was interesting because more than expressing solidarity with Doniger, what you saw is writers saying, we're going to pull out of Penguin because we can't trust you with your books, with our books. You saw that. And that to me was a somewhat dismaying reaction.
Why was it dismaying?
Because, I mean, if you're saying it's like each man for himself, then to me the whole idea of publishing and writing and this idea that it's like a republic of ideas, it sort of seems
I don't understand. How was it each man to himself? No, I'm just wondering, because what other stand could they have taken? How else could they have registered their protest?
By, like you're saying, banding together and saying, no, we insist that you fight the case, rather than saying, I'm protecting my own back and I don't...
I think a lot of people did try that.
Yeah,
they try talking to Penguin and saying, do something about it.
And the Penguin thing is, again, it's opaque, and as Urvashi says it, because when I published Wendy at Penguin, then published Wendy here at Aleph, and in both cases, someone like me, I don't know exactly what happened. So authors also didn't know exactly what happened. How were they going to, come together and have this community? And those who I think protested, I actually am full of admiration for them.
Actually, Anjum,
pulling out their book from a publisher.
Otherwise, just saying and not doing anything. I'm not saying that is what everyone should do, but that was their way of protesting. So.
But in anything that you sort of object to politically, you often have multiple choices before you of how to react. So say, for example, there is a university that gets taken over by a right-wing political party, you are teaching there. Your option is, okay, I'm going to fight this in some way through the system, or I'm going to opt out. So I don't think the decision that the authors took was any different from that. Some authors might say, let's band together and fight it. Yeah. Others might say, well, we are going to opt out. It is your individual choice, really.
But okay, last question, and then we'll open it out. I'm just wondering about the logical end conclusion of writers pulling out their books from publishers who are under fire. And I'm imagining a situation of extreme censorship, for instance, like in the USSR, and this growth of this underground literature, the samizdat literature, where it was just circulated privately, photocopied, and there was this whole underground network of dissemination of literature which publishers had really no part in. And now with the internet, that's increasingly possible. So where does that leave a publisher if all of us say, we can't trust you with our work and we're just going to go it alone and circulate it alone?
I think, I don't know what you think, Ravi or Kartika. I don't think that was the intention of the authors. The authors were saying very clearly, you didn't stand by your earlier commitment, so we do not feel confident to be with you. It's not that they were ditching the author, the publisher.
Well, they were saying that they will either go it alone or maybe find another publisher, and there have been instances. I'm thinking of the case of a book on Air India, which Bloomsbury pulled out, and the author went ahead and published it as an e-book on his own. And that's really an option that you then consider, because you could go,
So self-publishing is always available now.
I think it'll just change the way the whole publishing world functions, because the books that publishers may be reluctant to publish will make their appearance anyway in some. Karan Joy's book is like that. The Jayalalitha's book, you were talking about politicians. I mean, Jayalalitha's biography by Vasanthi.
Never saw the light of day.
Never saw the light of day, because Jayalalitha got a permanent injunction in every court in the country and the world, and the book was ready. And wasn't it it was when you were at Penguin or something, right?
So it's never...
No, it's just never got
It's
published.
not even on the internet or anything.
I don't know about
Okay.
I have a print copy.
Oh, you do?
But you can publish it, as an e-book, and you're all right?
Use this.
Sorry, I've got it. Sorry.
Technically, I think nobody's yet got on to stopping it. That's about all.
Okay.
Some law that says you can't,
okay.
but we don't know it.
Well, ebook, if it's done by publisher, then it's the same thing. They get out.
Mike.
Yeah.
Sorry. I was saying that as an ebook, if that is done by a publisher, then again it's the same thing. They'll get out to the publisher. If it's an ebook done privately somewhere and made available, making it available is easier. Obviously, I mean, no one can go vandalize an e-retailer or whatever. I mean, I suppose they can, but
Yeah, I think individuals are also fairly vulnerable, so they may not even want to do
One of the things that, when you asked about publishers' actions, one of the things that Ravi's colleague, a good friend of mine, Manas Saikia, was keen to do with a group of other publishers, try and set up a website which is registered somewhere outside of India, maybe, I don't know, Denmark or somewhere, where any of these things that get stopped being published is put up then there for free circulation, downloads, everything, so that you're actually making a statement that the voices cannot be silenced. And I think that's a really important thing to do.
the Hindus, Wendy Doniger's the first book, it's available here. Some people have been buying it. So, and there are distributors here in India who are actually ordering it from Amazon in the US and selling it here. So.
And she's lucky in that because it has
a publisher there.
A Western, American, British editions. It's not necessarily the case with Indian editions. Therefore, this website sounds like a wonderful idea. Okay, thank you so much for listening. Good
Thank
night.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for that interesting and superb session. We request Mr. Mitul Dikshit to give a token of gratitude to Ms. Kartika VK and Mr. Kiran Nagarkar.